Good evening, Magic players and card collectors of all kinds. Welcome back to my daddy's channel. I'm here chilling out on my daddy's clothes, waiting for treats, as per usual. And my daddy's back with a crazy video for you guys. That's right, Kaiba. I'm a little slow to the party, but I'm doing a video on the future of Commander. And I have an interesting take on it. A what if for you guys. But first let's go through this article like most people have, and we'll go from there. I was going to make a tinfoil hat, but I didn't have time, and it's kind of awkward at home right now, so I have a tin bottle. It's the closest I could get. So, on the future of Commander, Wizards of the Coast puts out this announcement a couple days ago. This past week has been tumultuous, and Commander fans and members of the Rules Committee and Magical Community as a whole, along the way, blah 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 blah, reading through it all. I'm sure you guys have read this. I'm sure most people have read this. Basically, in a nutshell, uh, it condemns the threats and the violence and the hate speech that went towards the RC, and it announces that the RC is handing over management of Commander to Wizards of the Coast. And with that, I am calling this format officially dead in terms of being a community run format, which is really sad to see. Wizards already has plans for what they're going to do next, working on the ban list, working on coming up with an objective way to do the tiers of Magic Commander, which apparently they're going to reduce to 4 tiers. I'm really not sure how well that's going to work, considering that they're calling Swords to Plowshares a tier 1 card, essentially. But, you know, how how they decide these things is how they're going to decide these things, and we're all just going to have to either play to their decisions or ignore them. But that's not what my video here today is mostly about. I have notes. Lots and lots of notes. Um, my video today is proposing a what if, as I said. And I am curious to hear other people's thoughts on this. This is going to be like a conspiracy thing here. And I'm not officially saying this is what happened. I am just putting it out there that this all seems kind of suspect. Um, so starting with uh, this video is going to be called, well, it's not going to be called this, but it's basically about my thoughts on. I went through school as a sociologist, and I basically that's a study of how groups behave, and I am under the belief that it's quite possible, although there's no way I can prove this per se, but it's quite possible that Wizards just played one hell of a long game in order to take over the most popular format of Magic. Because until they could get this handed over to them this week, this format has been largely community based and community driven. Wizards may have been printing cards left, right, and center to try and, influence Commander as best they could, but they honestly didn't have the kind of pull that the RC and the CAG had. And now that has kind of gone all to kaput, and I personally am here today to talk about the idea that maybe that was all a plan all along. So, I was thinking about this the other night, and really what keeps hitting me is this article I read. If my laptop wants to cooperate tonight, and it is going to be rather slow, unfortunately. Um, Come on, flip over. On MTG Rocks. MTG Rocks had an article they put out about this several days ago about the bans, and it was interesting what they mentioned here. Just reading this. This is a multi-layer issue, but it begins with two of the big sets of last year, Commander Masters and Lost Caverns of Ixalan. What they're talking about is the idea that it's the timing of this Commander ban announcement that has players fuming. Thanks to certain surrounding circumstances, the conspiracy theorists in the community are out in force. And I definitely am feeling the conspiracy on this one. Um, so what it comes down to is there was plenty of love for both these sets, but the undeniable chase cards of them were Jeweled Lotus and Mana Crypt, respectively. In Ixalan's case, there was a rare special guest printing, but it still drove a lot of demand. After all, these were the top tier Commander reprints of expensive cards. It wouldn't be a stretch to say that many players bought these products just for the chance to open one. I know lots of people who did try and purchase these products to try and get one of those rare cards. And um carrying on, the issue is that according to a Discord message from Jim LePage, who is a member of the RC Commander Rules Committee, which I guess he's no longer that. I'm not really sure how that works. The recent bans were actually in the works while these sets were being promoted and sold. We've been talking about these bans with each other, with Wizards, so they can do their own communications and align bans with the MTGO for a little over a year now, he's quoted as saying. And I think that that is just one step in a multi step plan by Wizards to try and manipulate the community, the rules committee, and the commander advisory group. All of us so that we would be willing to hand Commander over to them on a silver platter. And this plot, I believe, involves several steps, and I'm going to go over those steps with you now, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. So, my first thought is if you wanted to make a format become part of your property and it's being run by the community, what is the best way to do that? It's to divide and conquer the community. And so, I believe step one was for Wizards to make overpowered and underprinted cards for Commander, artificially pumping the value of those cards in the secondary market by having such few printings. And they've been making crazy cards for Commander since back in 2019. Dockside came out in 2019. You had Jewel Lotus debut in 2020. They put out something called Lutri the Spell Chaser in 2020, which was such a powerful card that it got banned before it was even sold on the market. And all these cards were there to try and drive up not only the values of different cards in Commander, to raise the prices to exorbitant amounts, and thus fuel line their pockets with cash, but to also force players to chase after these cards and try to add these cards to their decks so that they can compete at the highest level. Some of these cards are absolutely ludicrous with what effects they have compared to Magic cards of old, and Commander was based on the Magic cards of old, which is why I think it's important to I'm just going to get rid of that out of the screen. Why I think it's important to consider this first step of the plan to take over Commander. I believe that by pumping these cards and creating crazy effects on these cards, it really kind of put a sort of division between those who were in charge of responsibly managing Commander and the player base. And it sowed the first seeds of doubt and discord amongst them. So then we go on to step two, where you get the RC, and this is back to what I was saying before about what Jim LePage was saying. the RC comes up to Wizards and they say, look, some of these cards are just way overpowered, they're ruining the format, this was supposed to be a casual game, and we need to fix this. So we're going to consider banning such and such, such and such, such and such. And those bans clearly were Dockside, Jewel Lotus, and Mana Crypt. Whether they were considering other cards or not, I don't know. But I find it interesting that um, these bans were discussed over a year ago, and basically Wizards, in my opinion, pushed for time on these bans. They wanted time so that they could, as it says here, set up their own communications and align the bans with the MTGO. Um, but I think that's just what they were saying to the RC. I don't believe that's necessarily what their plan was. I and again, this is all speculation. I'm not saying any of this is fact. This is just some interesting thoughts for us all to consider. Um, so during the time period that they had between when these bands were first promoted to them and when these bands took place, a few steps needed to be put into place by Wizards to ensure that things would go the way they wanted them to. First, they needed to reprint some of these high value cards and make them chase cards. So, as you see in the article up above the quote by Jim LePage, we've got Commander Masters, Lost Caverns of Ixalan. Both these sets came out. Both of them had push cards. And those push cards happened to be the cards that were going to get banned. And they knew that those cards were going to be banned at the time they were pushing those sets. So, by releasing those sets prior to the ban with new treatments and limited printings once again, you're going to further jack the prices on these cards, making them more valuable to the people who are lucky enough to pull one or to the whales that have the money to collect them. You're also going to help You're also going to be boosting the prices for LGSs so that they have high value stock that they can then sell and keep their businesses afloat. And yes, I believe this plot is somewhat against the LGSs as well. It hasn't fallen out yet on them as hard as I think it's going to, but I think with Wizards taking over Commander, you're going to see a lot more Secret Lair products and a lot more direct to customer sales over products going to the LGSs. That's my fear. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. By encouraging players to chase these cards based on the rarity and value, they're hiking the price points, as they say, and therefore boosting the secondary market. So then we get to step 4. They know these bans are coming soon. They know they need to do something that will totally so force the hand of the rules committee. And the best way to do that, in my opinion, is to print something totally and utterly ridiculous. Something so ridiculous that it's going to break the game in any format that it's put into. And here along comes Nadu, I don't even remember the rest of the name of Nadu, but we all know what Nadu is. So we've got Nadu come in. Supposedly, right before printing, they took what was originally written on Nadu, changed the text, and didn't test it. And that's why Nadu came out with this crazy ability that completely destroyed Modern, and in turn created a lot of frustration for Commander players. To the point where it would encourage the RC to not only ban this card, but see it as an opportunity to ban the other cards that they wanted to ban before. I believe that they were manipulated by Wizards, in theory, into banning these cards at this time by putting Nadu into play. So then we go on to step 5. Right before these bannings are going to come into play, how about we reinforce the high value cards one last time with yet another printing? So they have Festival in a Box. So you have Festival in a Box coming out right before these bans take place, to the point where there are people who are receiving Festival in a Boxes today, after the bans have taken place, who bought those products knowing that Jewel Lotus and Mana Crypt were possibilities to pull, and can no longer do so. Well, they can still pull them, but they're not going to be worth anything to them compared to what they used to be. So you have all these people who are investing into these high-end products by Wizards, expecting to get high-end value out of it, expecting to get game pieces that they're going to be able to use for years to come, and be able to compete at the highest levels. And it's at this point when the bans come into play. So now, Wizards could have stepped forward and said, hey, we knew about these bans coming up, blah, 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 but Wizards kept kind of quiet on this, and I think that's the next part of their plan. They sit back and they allow everything to fall out as they predict it will. And as a person who studied sociology, I can tell you for a fact that a lot of what we've seen in terms of the behavior of people online, in terms of the hate, the violence that was threatened, etc., those are all reactions that could be predicted. You can predict behavior based on cause and effect quite accurately with, if anybody has sociology as a background, they'd be able to do this. I could have told you in my first video how negative the reactions would have been, and maybe I should have. I think I was caught up in the hype too of everything that happened. And while I've never advocated violence or hate speech or anything like that, I was on the bandwagon to say to the RC, hey, look, you fucked up and you need to fix this. That was one of I think that's how I ended that first video. And I believe now that this was all done to cause division amongst the players and amongst the groups that ran Commander. You've got a couple points in the FAQ that really make me feel that this is reinforced. Point 6, we have discussed our concerns about fast mana, including marquee cards like Jewel Lotus and Mana Crypt, with Wizards of the Coast for some time, but had not decided to ban them until recently. Why recently? Because Nadu came out, and Nadu forced their hand to ban stuff. We knew it would be a painful change and maybe waited too long, but once we decided to ban cards, we act and have never sat on a banning. This feels a little suspect to me, to be honest, because you have the message coming out that says, we've been talking about this for a year, and then you have the message coming out that says, we don't sit on bannings. This seems kind of contradictory. And I'm of the opinion that they did sit on the ban, because they were encouraged to sit on the ban by Wizards. Wizards said, hey, I get it, these cards are too much, but we need time to settle our affairs, and then they used that time to print those cards a second time. The other point that was really interesting from the frequently asked questions that the Commander Rules Committee put out was, why wasn't the CAG told about the bans or consulted? And here they admit that the CAG had been involved in numerous conversations about format speed over the past few years, and have shared their opinions with us. So the RC knew how the CAG felt about this, but they decided that they were not informed of the choice to ban these cards because we felt we had the information we needed from them and elsewhere, and as a large group it would be difficult to keep it under wraps. So why tell Wizards but not tell the CAG? The CAG, in my opinion, had just as much reason to know that these bans were coming as Wizards. And I've heard from different sources that there were leaks about this anyways. Jimmy and Josh, I think, or something like that, they have a podcast, and they were talking about how they had heard about this like a month or so before it actually happened. They just wrote it off as ridiculous. But the CAG and the RC were meant to work together. And I believe this is again some, and again, this is just all speculation. None of this is fact. I'm not saying this is how it happened. I'm just saying this is a possibility. It is possible, I believe, that Wizards encouraged the RC to keep this quiet and keep it under wraps, as it says, so that this wouldn't leak out. And that caused a division between the CAG and the RC to such an extent that we had two members so far, and I'm emphasizing so far because I think there would have been more before the RC handed off Commander to Wizards of the Coast officially. I believe we would have seen more CAG members resign. But two of them resigned without giving a specific reason, but it's fairly obvious that it was likely because they weren't consulted. And they felt offended by it. Or at the very least, they felt they should have been included, and the fact that they weren't really sowed discontent amongst the group. Now, I'm more than happy to be corrected on that, but that's just a possibility that I see. And so you have this infighting between the RC, between the CAG, and between the community members. Not even the community members were all divided about this ban. You had some people who got really upset about it, such as myself, who thought that this ban was done and it hurts the player base more than it helps. You have other people who felt that this was a pure game-based decision and it supports better gameplay. But with that said, we move on to one other thing that I find interesting. Oh, they didn't actually include that part down here. Do they have that part somewhere else? There was a reasoning given somewhere by the RC regarding the Sol Ring. And I feel this is again Wizards stepping in and saying, hey, look, you can ban these cards, but Sol Ring is in all our Commander products. You're just going to cause problems with the community if you ban Sol Ring. Whereas in reality, I think Sol Ring was more bannable than Jeweled Lotus. Jeweled Lotus, yeah, it helps get your commander out for sure, don't get me wrong, but it's a one and done. You have to sacrifice it in order to play it. I'm like 95% sure. Yeah, you have to sacrifice it in order to play it. I don't own one of them, so apologies for not knowing for sure. But whereas Sol Ring is just a continual advantage for anybody who gets it out turn one. But setting that aside, back to my original point. The whole plan was to get everybody so divided and so hostile with each other that there would be no other choice but for us to all agree and be willing to hand over the format to Wizards of the Coast. And I believe that was why you see them stepping in this week. Yes, they're saying, hey, look, we're here to protect the RC members, we are against the violence, blah, 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 blah. And I am totally on board with that. But is that the legit reasoning, or is that just the reasoning that's being put forward? I feel there's a lot here. I feel there's a lot of questions that need to be answered. And I feel like they're not being answered by the rules committee, they're not being answered by Wizards. The CAG is completely in the dark. I think there was something amiss here. At the very least, it seems way too suspect not to for me not to make a video about it. Whether it happened or not, I am not saying that for a fact. I am not making any statements as a permanent, this is the facts of what took place. I am simply speculating. But there is a lot of. There's too much for me to ignore for me not to mention that this is a possibility. And I'm curious what you guys think about this. Maybe I'm out in the weeds. Maybe I'm just a nut with a tinfoil hat, or in this case, a tin bottle. But this seems really, really suspect. And too much like. How do I want to word this? I made my notes, but I kind of ran out of notes now. It seems too much like it was planned out from the beginning. The changes with Nadu are really suspect. The fact that they were talking about this a year before and then still printed those cards and pushed those cards to sell packs, knowing full well that the ban was coming on those cards. It really feels like Wizards manipulated us all. Whether that's true or not, I leave that to you guys in the comments. Me personally, I just believe there's a big what if that needs to be answered. So I leave that to you. What if this is all just a big plot to take over a format that we all love and monopolize it further for Wizards' pockets and for the shareholders? What are we looking at in the future if the future is not run by the community any longer? It's a scary thought.